For 3 years I wore it, so they would let me stay.
3 years of silk against my skin, and I never once let them see my face. I learned to wake already covered and to start every morning half erased. They told me the veil was an honor. I knew, even half asleep, it was a leash. Every morning the same first thought, not good morning, but stay down, stay covered, stay small. The other pillow was always cold. I never asked why, I already knew. Each morning I smoothed the veil myself. No lady's maid, no mother, just silk and silence. And every morning the same vow, whispered to no one, not forever, just today. I kept my posture like a soldier. Obedience was the only law that fed me.
I kept my face under silk to keep my house.
I tied it the way he taught me, tight enough to feel, loose enough to deny. 1,000 mornings of the same knot, the same hush, the same held breath. Tenderless, the way you'd secure a parcel, not a person. I never memorized my face anymore, only the knot that hid it. Every loop was a vow I never said out loud. Every knot, a yes I never meant, even my hands knew. The knot I tied 1,000 times still made them shake. The knot done, the face gone. The day could begin. Done. And now the corridor that swallowed every morning before this one. Every detail memorized. Which strand to free, which to let the silk take. 1,000 days of this. And not one of them the morning I chose. The corridor was a gallery of glass, and I the one exhibit they never hung, bare feet on cold marble. The only way I was allowed to take up room. No heels, no perfume, no greeting. The passage knew me only by the silk. Head bowed, never the center, even when the corridor was built for one. They never heard me enter a room, only the silk did, and it never told. A ghost in my own house, gliding past the glass, half there, half silk, half gone. Each dawn I cross this corridor, 1,000 days long, bare feet on marble that never warms beneath me. The glass keeps a fainter me beside me, walking in step, never one pace ahead. I learned to walk without sound, to take up no room the daylight could claim first. 3 years of corridors, and I still arrive at the same cold place I never left. He gave it to me the way you give a keepsake. Warm hands, warm light, a smile I mistook for shelter. He said it had carried the women of his house, a weight too precious for a bare face. I watched his hands smooth the weave and thought devotion could be inherited like linen. He told me it belongs to her now. I did not yet know which her he meant. Memory keeps the warmth longer than the man it was handed from. Then the cold rushes back. The cold corridor again, the warm frame gone. Only silk and stone remain where he had smiled. Even the silk remembered his hands longer than his face ever remembered mine. I keep the memory the way the silk keeps a crease, pressed in, invisible, never undone. 1,000 dawns and the hallway never shortened. Only my memory learned to loop inside it. Every step was a small obedience I thought the marble was keeping score of. It kept nothing. I wait by the wall until every plate is full. I learned which seat was mine by being last. A servant's shadow crossing me was the closest thing to being noticed most mornings. They lifted porcelain spoons above me while I stood below the table's order, learning patience as manners. Even my hands learned to wait. Palm closed, thumb hid, desire folded before it could be named. Only when every mouth was served did permission arrive. Unspoken, never asked of me. My chair sat at the table's cold margin, where the steam reached last and the talk did not reach at all. I sat the way silk settles, soft, obedient, already falling into the shape they had left me. The bowl was set in front of me, already half cooled. Even the steam had been told not to wait. A spoon lifted is a small claim on the day. Mine always trembled before it arrived. They spoke the morning past me as if I were a curtain drawn against a draft they hadn't noticed. I lift the silk just enough to eat. Ye me and anyone see my mouth. Even hunger was a thing I kept hidden. A tremor in the wrist, the silk closed back. Even eating, I was practicing the vanishing they preferred. Each morning, the same ritual, the slit opening just wide enough for a spoon, then closing like a wound that must not be seen to bleed. I learned to eat without a face, to lift the silk the width of one finger, take the kanji, and lower it before anyone could be reminded I was there. My left hand covering my right. Even the small rebellion of a shake had to be hidden, smoothed over, made invisible to the table that never looked. 3 years I poured myself through that narrow opening. A mouth, a swallow, then the silk shut, and the woman behind it ceased to be a question. I learned which tremors the table would forgive and which it would punish, so I swallowed them down the same throat the silk had opened for the kanji. The orchids were taller than my presence at that table. They were the family's eye, and they looked through me the same way. A tremor is a confession the body makes without permission, and mine was learning to perjure itself, to keep them from noticing I was still awake. I had practiced the vanishing they preferred. What now? The empty spoon set down, the silk sealed. I was almost finished disappearing for them. Adrian entered as he did everything, checked his watch, took the head of the table, and let his eyes pass through me as through already cleared glass. 3 years, and he had never once entered a room by way of my face. I was the room he had finished walking through long before he arrived. To him, the watch's minute was worth more than my mornings. I had counted 1,000 of those glances at his wrist, and none of them had ever landed on me. I learned to read his back the way other wives read their husbands' faces. The cold shelf of his shoulder said everything his mouth never would. He ran the breakfast table the way he ran the firm, placing each object an inch closer to himself, as if my place had been silently deleted from the ledger. He sat at the head and refused me as a destination even for his eye bones. I was scenery, and scenery does not get to be seen. He was always waiting for someone better to enter the room, and I was the still warm chair he kept having to step around on the way to them. On that long marble, the distance between us was measured in orchids. 12 buds between his cup and my invisible hands, and not one of them for me. Even the way he took his seat took from mine. Every inch of marble he claimed was an inch of me that quietly stopped existing. He sat at the head and I sat at the edge. The table spoke the only sentence he ever spoke about us, and the orchids agreed. His mother entered like a season, addressing the orchids first, as if the room itself were her daughter, and I merely a vase she had not chosen. She greeted the orchids by name. Her hand moved over their petals the way my mother's once moved over my hair, a small daily inheritance handed to flowers instead of me. She could pass me in the hall and her shoulder would not turn. I existed for her the way a doorstep exists, to be crossed without comment. She spoke of the gala's flowers as if I were a member of the kitchen that would arrange them. To her, I was never a daughter, only a hand needed to put something down. I bowed my wine-red head a quarter inch toward her shoulder, the way a servant learns the geography of forgiveness long before she learns her own lungs. She was already planning the gala, as if my seat there were an oversight the orchids would soon be asked to correct. I was the centerpiece she meant to replace. Not one card bore my name. I listened to my own absence being arranged in white lilies by a woman whose daughter I had hoped once to be permitted to call mother. The petal fell where she had looked at me, and did not, and I understood finally that the gala would not be a seat they were forgetting to give me, but a grave. She would not sit until the last woman was served. 3 years taught her the small choreographies of the invisible. Then his mother came in and greeted the orchids by name, but not me, and asked what the gala centerpiece should be. I let my eyes lift only long enough to read his jaw tighten, then lowered the silk back over the small insolence of looking. I had learned to keep defiance the size of a glance, small enough to deny it had ever happened. I saw it, the small clamp of his jaw, and I knew he had noticed my looking and would punish it by never mentioning it. I looked again once and counted it as the most dangerous thing I had done all morning. His back never turned toward me. I made a study of that back the way other women study a face. Even the act of staring had to be smuggled, a thief of my own attention, beneath the silk. We had this language, jaw to eye, never spoken, and I was fluent in it, and I hated that I was. I re-knotted the silk the way one relocks a door, or quiet, daily, as though the room inside had never stirred. The veil and I had an agreement. I held still, it held my face, and neither of us was honest about the cost of the stillness. He left the table without looking at me, and his shadow crossed my hands, and that was the closest he came all day. In the front parlor there hung Céline, green, lit, golden, and behind her frame I passed, veiled, like a draft no one named. The mother polished Céline's face with a cloth, and the cloth, passing, erased mine from the glass. For 1 second, Céline's painted eyes wore my veil, and I thought, if she could see me, she would not stop laughing. Even the floor they walked me on was lit green. Emerald for her, wine for me, and that was the whole decorum of the house. I learned to walk a room the way smoke does. Present, unaddressed, gone before anyone thought to point at it. They kept her lit even when no one was in the room. A small electric devotion I had never been paid. I stood in her face long enough to feel it was the wrong one, and the wrongness was the only thing I had been given to wear. Out of the green room and into the gray hall, I carried nothing from that parlor except the knowledge that I had been edited out of it. In the long mirror, our faces aligned for a moment. The daughter they meant, the wife they tolerated, and then I moved, and only one remained. I left the room, and the room did not record it, which was, I suppose, the whole arranging of my life in that house. Then the mother's voice rang down the hall, and the woman under the silk stopped walking for the first time in 3 years. I had been the wife they did not name. Now I heard the sentence spoken back to myself, and it landed cleanly, and I let it. The reflection in the window stayed a second longer than I did, as though a version of me had decided something the rest had not caught up to.
This is my real daughter, Gat, the one who matters. You will meet her at the gala.
Her voice carried down the marble corridor like a verdict stamped in gold. My real daughter, the one who matters. And I did not turn. The words struck the glass panel and echoed. I heard them land like a gavel struck in my own kitchen, in my own silence. She spoke as though I were already a footnote in the household ledger, named once, then crossed out in cold ink. The one who matters. She said it to the orchids, to the frame, to the whole house, and I stood very still and let it become true. I pressed my fingertips into the silk at my hip until the knuckles went white, the only answer I was permitted to give. I walked on before the sentence finished, because I already knew the last word. It was never my name, and then I stopped, the silk still swinging forward, my reflection catching in the portrait's glass like a ghost leaning out. My reflection leaned beside her painted face, emerald and wine-red silk layered in the same cold frame, one real, one refused. The skirt of silk kept moving without me, a small pendulum of dark water settling around my ankles in the still hall. I watched my own ghost mouth the words back, real daughter, and saw that the glass did not flinch, and neither did I. Between the painted Céline and my veiled ghost, the corridor stretched like an altar no one had asked me to kneel at. The portrait's eyes were fixed past me, as they always had been, and my reflection understood for the first time that it was the room being haunted. A draft from the river found the hem of my veil and lifted it once, the silk brushing my lips like a farewell I had not yet spoken. I held my own gaze in the glass, behind the paint, behind the veil, and saw clearly who the hallway was built to honor and who it was built to erase. I let the silk settle back to my shoulders and stood a long moment in that mirror, studying the face the frame would never hold. Then I stepped out of my reflection and the glass held only Céline again, lit and lovely and absolutely alone. 3 years before, on the afternoon my father's company folded, the apartment smelled of packed boxes and pearl cases, and we divided a ruin between us. Céline stood in the wardrobe light, lifting our mother's pearls onto her throat with both hands, certain as a queen taking inventory. She did not weep for the company. She counted what remained, and what remained in her reckoning was everything that shone. I stood by the packing crates in the doorway, already carrying the ledger in my coat, already half resigned to what came after. Adrian's ring sat in my open palm, gold band catching the last warm light, and beside it, folded in tissue, the length of wine-red silk. He had placed them in my hand without kneeling, without a vow, only the quiet sentence, "My grandmother will never receive an uncovered bride." Céline fastened the last pearl clasp and looked through me toward the mirrors, toward the apartment that would stay hers, toward the version of us that survived. I closed my fingers over the ring and the veil together. Two small weights, one metal, one silk, both quietly heavier than they looked. I did not ask for the pearls because I had already understood. She would keep what glittered and I would keep what I was told to cover. I turned toward the door with the veil folded against my chest, and Céline stayed behind in the warm light, in the pearls, in the whole bright world.
My grandmother will never receive an uncovered bride.
Nodded. He said the veil belonged to me now. The way you give someone an inheritance you have already spent. I nodded, the way the newly poor nod. Grateful for any ceiling, no matter how low it pressed. He drew it over me himself, smoothing it down the way a man closes a curtain on a room he has decided is finished.
My grandmother will never receive an uncovered bride.
I stood wearing his grandmother's permission, and somewhere beneath it, the girl who had arguments had already gone quiet. He believed he had given me something. He never saw that the silk took more than it ever covered. I taught my eye to stay low behind the silk, and that was the first lesson I ever learned too well. He held the door like a gentleman. I walked through it into 1,000 mornings of looking down. By the time the door closed behind me, I was already half erased, and I called it obedience, and I called it love. The back office was the only room no one entered. Its silence was the one luxury they hadn't thought to charge me for. Numbers stayed mine when nothing else did. Small, honest figures no one had bothered to take. I kept the books the way a prisoner keeps a calendar, like slow, deliberate, marking the distance I was surviving. In that room, the silk was just cloth. It forgot for an hour to be a sentence. I closed the book the way one closes a door, and let the stillness be the only thing I owned. Behind the glass, the city hummed without me, and the silk felt for the first time like a thing I had chosen and regretted. I returned to the figures because they did not flinch when the silk rustled, and that was already more decency than the house had. Reading was the one act no one supervised, and on a Tuesday in autumn, it began quietly to rewrite the house. The pencil went still the way a held breath goes still, and the room, which had been my refuge, began to change its temperature. Whatever I had come to the ledger for was finished. What I was leaving with had not yet been given a name. My father's name signed twice, but the second hand tilted the last stroke the wrong way, and that was where I began to wake. He had copied my father's hand the way he had copied our name, and left one small lie in the ink. In one held second, the silk stopped meaning obedience and became simply evidence I was wearing. 3 years of pages turned back to one Tuesday, and the wrong stroke dated itself precisely to the week the veil came down over my face. I moved the paper the way the silk moved around my breath, so quietly the house would not feel it leave. I closed the book on 3 honest years, and beneath the wine-red silk, I carried the one dishonest page that would carry me out. I kept the books the way a nun keeps ours, until the night I found his name written in my father's hand. 2 strokes met where they should not have. My father's name, then his, the second one leaning the wrong way. A forger copies the shape but forgets the slant, the tilt of a man too sure to be caught. The discovery did not startle me. It only answered the coldness I had been mistaking for propriety for 3 years. I traced the stroke the way one traces a scar, to learn which way the blade had entered. A second pass proved it was not the lamp, nor my eyes. The line did not belong to my father. I held the breath I had been holding since my wedding morning, and the room turned cold in a new way. When I stood, the question was no longer why he hid me, but how long he had been signing me away. 3 years. The veil and the signature had been written on the same day, and I had not seen it. I had been counting the mornings behind the silk when I should have been counting the signatures. I did not weep. The silk had already spent 3 years' worth, and I had none left to give. I laid my hand over his forgery, the way one lays a hand over a sleeping snake, to know it was real. The fear drained out of me and left something useful in its place. Patience with a direction now. I would not confront him with it. I would let the veil keep my face while the page undid his name. I touched my ribs the way I had been taught to calm myself, and felt the page already lodged against bone. Beneath the silk, the page lay where no servant, no husband would ever think to search. I closed the ledger on the place the page had been, and the gap read louder than any signature. I pressed the silk flat over the page the way one presses a wound closed, and felt it hold. I stood, and the silk hung heavier than it had an hour before. Heavier by one folded page. I smoothed the silk until no fold, no line, no shadow would confess what I carried against my bones. If the silk had taught me one thing, it was how to wear a secret so plain that no one would think to look. I left the lamp dead behind me. The books were closed. Whatever came next would be settled in another light. I walked the corridor as I had walked it 1,000 dawns. Only now my hand carried weight, where before it carried only habit. Anyone watching would have seen a veiled wife steadying her breath. No one was watching. That had always been the trick. The year before, at the holiday table, Céline reached across the linen as if to fix my veil, the way one fixes a collar on a dog. I let her fingers touch what Adrian had tied, and I learned that hers had always been the hand that chose my face. Last winter, our table gleamed with candles and crystal, and Céline reached across to fix the veil Adrian had tied for me. Her fingers knew exactly where the silk sat, the way a seamstress handles a garment she did not make but owns. She smoothed the silk the way you pat a child you have already decided to scold. The table watched, and Adrian watched his plate, and that was the order of the world that night. I kept my hands open on my knees beneath the cloth, because closing them would have said what I could not yet say. She called the adjustment small, sister-like, a courtesy. Everyone in that amber light agreed it was a courtesy. They called it love. The silk remembered the grip. That was the first night I understood the veil was not mine to wear, but theirs to arrange.
You poor thing, doesn't it get hot under there?
The table laughed on cue, a small, loyal orchestra, and I let the silk take the sound. Adrian kept his eyes on his plate the way he kept his eyes on everything, and as if refusing to look could keep the world around.
Thing, doesn't it get hot under there?
I counted the laughter the way you count rain, and I refused the small mercy of looking.
You poor thing, doesn't it get hot under there?
Behind me, the laughter was a small, polite weather. Inside the silk, I was a season they could not name. Adrian did not raise his head. He knew what he would see if he did, and the table laughed the way money laughs. Together, certain.
You poor thing, doesn't it get hot under there?
After the laughter went, only the silk was left, and only one tear rose beneath it, and I would not let it fall. I could hear my own heart through the weave, louder than the river beneath the windows. The fabric darkened where the tear reached, the smallest bruise I had ever allowed. I had wept dry inside that silk for 3 years. I wept wet now, and still the room saw nothing. I felt the wet like a secret kept between 2 skins, mine and the veil's. I would not, even now, give them the small opera of my crying. Inside the silk, my face was wet and not yet lost. Outside the silk, the laughter had already eaten its fill. Then I dried my face on the inside of the silk, and no soul in that room ever knew I had cried. My lashes pressed wet against the silk, and one tear seeped through. A dark bloom I would not allow to fall. I held the salt against my skin until it stung. The fabric drank what my face refused to spill. Then I understood, quiet as a door closing. The veil was never my shield. It was their private joke. I had knotted it each morning thinking it sheltered me. It sheltered only their comfort, never mine. 3 years of silk, and I had been the furnishing they smiled behind. The punchline in a room that never laughed with me. I was not hidden, I was displayed. A veiled thing they could ignore without the effort of looking away. The joke had a shape, a woman so obedient she erased her own face and called it love. Protection would have asked my permission, this asked only my silence, and I had given it freely. I traced the word in my mind, protection, and felt it rot, soft and wet between my fingers. A punchline does not know she is won until the laughter starts, and then it is too late to laugh first. But I had not laughed. I had only cried into silk, and crying was the last thing they expected me to stop doing, so I stopped. The tear dried on the inside of the veil, and something in me dried with it, clean and final. I returned to the small office, spread the photocopied filings flat, and began to fold them. Hands steady for the first time in a year. Each crease I made was exact, deliberate, the way my father once taught me to fold a letter that mattered. The leather folio opened like a mouth I had kept shut too long. I laid the pages inside, edge to edge. No tremor now. My wrist had learned obedience. Tonight I would teach it a different lesson. Precision under my own command. I pressed the folio closed and ran my thumb along the seam, sealing 3 years of silence into a single carryable weight. The desk lamp caught the edge of the leather, and for a moment it looked like something worth holding. Mine, and legal, and soon. I squared the folio against the desk's corner the way I had once squared my own shoulders to enter their dining room. Steady did not mean calm. Steady meant I had decided, and no amount of silk could unmake the decision already made. I slipped the folio into a clutch the color of dried blood, small enough to carry, heavy enough to end a family. My fingers did not shake. They remembered instead every wrong stroke of every forged signature I would make them answer for. That night I stood before the mirror and lifted the veil, slow once, learning the face I was about to spin. I watched the silk rise from my brow like a fog lifting off cold water, revealing a stranger I had buried alive. I held my own gaze in the glass until it frightened me. Then I set the veil back, neatly. Not yet, not yet. But the face beneath was already governing the hands that tied the knot, and it would not be taught patience again. She untied it once before the glass, held her own naked face, then retied the knot, not yet, the light undimmed in her eyes. Again she lifted the silk, slow as a breath let go, watched the stranger in the mirror answer, then hid her again, patient a little longer. A third time she bared her face to the mirror, held it like a verdict rehearsed, retied the silk. Not tonight, but the verdict would keep. She dressed the stranger back under silk, but the knot she retied tonight belonged to a woman it no longer governed, only preserved. The veil was restored, the face beneath now author of its own concealment. Obedience practiced past habit like a weapon rehearsed. She sealed her reflection back behind silk. The woman in the mirror was no longer a prisoner rehearsing. She was a prosecutor awaiting her hour. Adrian Lowe entered their bedroom back first, set his cufflinks down like a man made alone by choice, and asked, eyes never finding her. He set down his cufflinks the way he set down his wife. Back turned, hands occupied, the question lobbed over his shoulder like luggage. He spoke to the mirror, never the woman behind. Have you chosen a downstairs dress for the gala? The kind that photographs smaller, that keeps to the wallpaper. She watched the long line of his shoulder absorb the question without twitching, a back that had never once been around to meet her face. He half-asked, half-commanded, chosen a downstairs dress for the gala, as if dressing her were a chore on his list beneath the cufflinks. He stood turned away at the dresser, framed the question like a memo to the air, and waited for the veil behind him to answer like furniture should. His whole body stayed aimed at the glass. Chosen a downstairs dress for the gala, he repeated by not repeating, his quiet a verdict already filed. The line of his back kept the front of him to the mirror. Whatever answered behind, he had already decided it would not be a face worth seeing. Two figures in the same room, the marriage the room between them. He to the glass, she to the silk. The question he asked answered only by where neither of them would turn. He asked it the way one keys a code into a safe. Chosen a downstairs dress for the gala, and already sure the room behind held only silk and silence. Yes, she said, and the single word hung in the cold air like a bell rung once in a marble church, lasting longer than his question. Yes, only that, the lighter word, easier than the silk above it, harder than the marble beneath, enough to let him think her docile still. Her answer traveled the length of his shoulder to find nothing waiting, a back that had never in 3 years bent to look at her intact. Yes, a one-word surrender she handed him like a stone, while beneath the silk her eyes were filing every line of him away. Yes, she said twice tonight. once allowed for him, once under the silk for the woman in the mirror who would not have to say it again. The yes settled on the bed like a dropped coin, a small, bright, unpaid. The back it was aimed at, stood on, done with her, as always. Her yes washed over the back of him like water over slate, absorbed, unreturned. The back that, 3 years in, had never once turned to find her. She studied the back of him the way a notary studies an unsigned page, and the veil kept her verdict hidden until its hour arrived. One word answered, and 3 years of back turned. 3 years of glass between them, settled into a stillness she would soon translate into marble and kneeling. Yes, and the silk rose with her as she left the room he had never turned in. The back he never bent now silhouetted behind the veil she would soon make the room kneel for. Days blurred into the river's crawl across white sheets. She sat veiled at the window, counting light like a sentence being served. Every dawn the same silk, the same gray water, the same vigil. Her eyes behind the slit never once blinked away. She watched the seasons slide down the glass. The veil held, her patience held. The ledger hidden against her ribs held too. Light crept over the bed like a slow tide. She let it reach her hem and recede. 1,000 evenings measured in silk. She sat folded at the edge of the bed, gloved hands still, the veil catching the last of a sun she was not allowed to greet. Her reflection floated in the window, half erased by the river glare. A ghost rehearsing the shape of the woman she would become. Behind the veil's dark frame, the city throbbed on. She memorized its rhythm the way a prisoner memorizes the sound of the lock. Her fingers lay open in her lap, light sliding between them. She was learning to hold nothing she was not willing to drop. Dusk thinned the river to a thread of brass. She did not stir, did not eat, only watched the world she was about to take back. Midnight blue soaked the penthouse. The veil went black against it, and still she stood, a lit fuse no one in that house could see. The invitation came on heavy cream stock. Her fingers found it before his did, and her name was a blank line. She read the empty space where a name should be, a silence pressed into paper, signed by the household that owned her silence. Adrian's hand arrived a half second late. The envelope was already in her grip, already hers, though the ink said otherwise. Over her veiled shoulder he reached. She did not flinch, only traced the blank line with her thumb as if reading a verdict. Her thumb stopped on the line that should have spelled May. Instead, nothing. A held breath set in typeface. Two hands caught the same envelope. Hers in wine silk, his in charcoal cuff, and for a frame neither let go. Through the veil's slit she read her own absence. The household had printed the invitation for everyone except the wife it hid. Adrian's gaze found her grip on the envelope and tightened. She placed it back on the console as if it weighed nothing. She set the invitation down between them like a card she was not yet ready to play. The blank line faced up. The blank line held the light. She looked at it the way a woman looks at a door she has already decided to walk through. At the mother's tea, she slid the invitation across the porcelain. A veiled wife photographs badly dear, said like last season's coat. The words landed on May like a brushed crumb. She bowed her veiled head once and poured the tea her mother-in-law would not. The cream envelope came to rest against her saucer, her blank line facing up. She folded her hands around the cup and stayed. Through the veil's slit, she watched the steam curl. The dismissal soaked into the silk the way 3 years of smaller ones had. The mother's figure moved behind the teacups, already forgetting her. May remained, a steady shape the room refused to photograph. She lifted her cup unhurried and drank. The line swallowed, the verdict noted, the blank line folded once and pressed flat beneath her ribs. The invitation slid across lacquered tea wood and stopped at her elbow. A veiled wife photographs badly, dear, said like last season's coat. Porcelain rang once as the mother drew back her hand. The verdict rested on the table between the untouched sweets. May did not touch the card, the blank where her name should be held more light than the gold leaf edge around it. She folded her hands in her lap beneath the silk and let the dismissal land. Filed, not felt, beside the signatures she had already copied.
Céline will be announced as our family's representative.
His silhouette held the river light. Behind her veil, May watched the city slide past his shoulder, indifferent as marble. He did not turn. The cufflink caught the cold sun, a small, bright anchor to nothing she could reach. She measured the silence, 3 full breaths of river haze, before the words settled into the glass like froth.
Céline will be announced as our family's representative.
Her thumb, hidden in folded silk, pressed the dried blood clutch once. The firm's name, already hers in the filings, burned beneath her ribs. His reflection lay flat on the cold glass. The city fell away behind him, and he did not move to meet her. She heard it as a contract, not a decree. Each word a clause she would reverse in a ballroom at midnight.
Céline shall be named as the family's representative.
May lowered her gaze to the envelope on the side table. The blank line waited, patient as the notary she had already called.
You will sit behind the orchids, and the veil stays.
Reason, the orchids at the gala would frame her like a saint behind glass. Silent, named by no one, watched by all. His gaze held hers a beat too long. The marble of his irises caught nothing, gave nothing back. She felt the order settle like a lock turning. Recessed behind orchids, the veil a seal she would break herself.
The veil stays on. No reason is good enough.
Behind the silk, her lips moved, not in plea, but rehearsal, mapping each word she would say to a silent room. He delivered verdicts the way he placed cufflinks on the dresser, and with his back turned, expecting the room to obey. The recessed section, the orchids, the veil, the chapel built to hide her. She would burn it down with a single
Sit in the recessed section. Do not remove the veil.
veil. She received it as she received his ring 3 years ago, with a nod and the slow filing away of one more
Will you stand beside the bride at the head table?
table. He did not answer. The not answer was the answer, and she added it to the ledger she carried beneath her ribs. Adrian's back at the window, his silence a wall. Beneath the veil, she steadied the question she had carried all morning.
Does that mean you'll stand beside her at the head table?
He did not turn. The tie adjusted itself like a reflex. The question hung in the cold air between his shoulder and her veil. The invitation lay between them like a verdict. Her name a blank line. His answer the turning of a shoulder. Beneath the wine-red silk, she steadied the secret she had sewn against her ribs. The question was only the first stone. He framed himself high and centered against the river. The silhouette of a man already standing at the head table that was not yet set. Through the slit of the veil, she watched his silence. She had learned to read the answer in what a man refused to say. She lowered her eyes first, but it was the gesture of a player setting a piece on a board, not surrender. He turned from the window at last, not to face her, but to surveil her, the words arriving cold as cut glass.
May, don't make this difficult. Céline is what we are, you what we hide.
His gloved hand stayed on the sill, idle as marble, as if the sentence had cost him nothing at all. Beneath the silk, she received the verdict. The words landed on the wine-red weave and left no ripple she would allow him to see. His jaw held the shape of the last word a moment too long, as if contempt were a posture he practiced in mirrors. The orchid between them dropped a petal onto cold stone. The room arranged itself around his verdict, as if the walls already agreed. His eyes did not blink. They held her the way a ledger holds a debt. Written, unwavering, already decided. She did not flinch. The wine-red silk drank the words and kept its color, and she kept her stillness like a closed account. The room itself became the sentence. The distance between his high window and her low corner was exactly the distance a family keeps from what it hides. He turned his back again, the conversation already over in his mind. The silence he left behind was the answer she had been counting on. Through the slit of the veil, she held his gaze. Her lid was steady now, a new stillness that had nothing to do with patience. A single tear gathered at the corner of her eye and refused to fall. The silk would not have the satisfaction of her surrender. Her lashes pressed the silk like a pen pressed to a page. About to write something the veil was not prepared to allow. She held the look longer than he could, the silk between them a membrane he could no longer cross. His gaze was the first to fall. The cold light mapped her cheekbone like a contour line, and her stillness hardened into it. This was no longer endurance, it was architecture. The river light in her eye rose and fell with the dusk outside, but her lid did not follow it. She was waiting now, and waiting was a weapon. Even her blink became a decision. The lid's small surrender was captured and canceled before it could be read. The stillness that came into her eye was not patience. It was the hush of a woman who has already moved the first piece and means to take the board. Her lid did not flutter. It held him the way a held breath holds a room. Not patience, but the first quiet of a woman about to act. She did not look away. She learned him through the slit the way a card player reads a hand already dealt, and found the house had overplayed. She dropped her gaze first, but only the way a chess player pulls a hand back from the board. The move already made and irreversible. It looked like surrender. It was the small bow of a woman who has just set the first piece on the board and means to take the rest. A piece set down does not need to be watched. She lowered her eyes the way you lower a veiled hand, already knowing the row it would clear. She let him believe the silence was his. It was hers. Measured, slotted. A first move that looked like the last courtesy she would ever extend. To yield the gaze was the cheapest move on the board, and the only one that cost him nothing to see coming. She kept the costly ones hidden. Even her reflection practiced the surrender she did not mean. She let it bow for her, then drew the silk across the glass like a closed door. She had already set 3 pieces she had never told him about. The lowered gaze was the 4th, played not at him but at the silence around him. A closed eye is not a closed mind. She let the lid fall the way a general sheathes a drawn sword. Having already counted the dead, he walked away believing he had won the silence. She stood in it. Already 4 moves down a board he had never been told they were playing. She tucked the move where the silk could keep it. Whatever he had asked her to hide behind, she had begun to hide things of her own behind it too. Then Céline arrived, emerald and gold, a doorway made of light, and pressed her mouth to the air beside the veil as if greeting a coat on a hook. Air, not skin. Even the greeting refused to touch her. A ceremony of almost contact performed so the room could see how generously the Bright One tolerated silk. Céline called her G, sister, and let the syllable ring like a small bell rung at someone too slow to hear it. The jest wore emerald. Her mocking had the cadence of generosity. To anyone watching, it looked like a kind sister greeting a quiet one. Only the veil knew what the kindness was for. She moved through the penthouse the way light moves through rooms she has already decided are hers. And the veil, for once, stood still while Emerald poured past it. Céline said, "Gee," as though it were a flower she had been handed and could set down at any time. The flower did not answer. The silk did not move. Her laugh was built for rooms, not for sisters. It scattered off the marble and found May like a searchlight finds the one figure meant to stay indoors. Every gesture of Céline's was a small stage direction, and May, behind Silk, had begun to learn the staging the way a captured queen learns the exits. The word Jai left her mouth like a coin tossed at a hat, bright, small, already spent. The veil let it land without sounding. She left the doorway like a room she had only rented. May stayed, the veil still warm from where the air had almost touched it, almost. In the mirror, Céline was the central figure. May stood behind her the way a shadow stands behind a lamp, present, muted, already arranged. Mother and daughter consulted the mirror as if consulting a verdict. May stood in its back field the way props stand, visible only when someone needed to reach past them. Céline tried to dress the way a queen tries a scepter, for weight, for sheen, for the kind of silence it would command from a room. May was the silence in the back of the glass. She was the chair they reached around, the wall they photographed in front of, and none of them had noticed the chair had begun, in silence, to learn the room. Céline moved through the rooms like weather, trying dresses against the mirror while the mother consulted, and May stood behind her like a curtain rod never asked its opinion. The mother held jewels to Céline's earlobe, weighing them like shares, and spoke of how the emerald photographed, never once consulting the veiled figure pinned between the hanging racks. Céline held gown after gown against her collar, laughing at her own reflection in 3 tongues, and in the unlit vanity across from her, the veil sat like a stone in still water. She floated toward the gilt mirror trailing green light, and the mother fussed the hem, while May stood at the wall like a hat stand, the kind no one thanks for holding. The trifold mirror tripled Céline into a crowd of herself, and the mother counted the reflections like an audience, while May's one small corner stayed empty of attention. The mother drew back to admire Céline as one admires a finished portrait, and through the doorway behind them, May walked away unseen, a moving curtain they had already forgotten.
Don't you wish you could wear something like this, G? Don't you wish you could wear something like this, G? Don't you wish you could wear something like this, G? Don't you wish you could wear something like this, G? Don't you wish you could wear something like this, G?
Don't you wish you could wear something like this, sister?
Don't you wish you could wear something like this, G? Don't you wish you could wear something like this, G? Don't you wish you could wear something like this, G? Don't you wish you could wear something like this, G? I prefer my own colors. 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 I prefer my own colors.
Past midnight, the office held only one lamp, and her, the final page copied, the folio sealed, slid into a clutch the color of dried blood. She aligned the last stack edge to edge. 3 years of quiet bookkeeping pressed into a leather-bound inch. and sealed it herself. The clutch was the shade of dried blood, chosen weeks ago, waiting like everything else for the night it would be needed. She laid her hand on the sealed leather as if swearing an oath to it. The first promise in 3 years made to herself. Nothing would be copied again. She tested the seal the way one tests a lock already thrown, once for certainty, and then no more. She stood with the clutch pressed to her ribs as if it were a pulse she had grown outside herself. Held, counted, obeyed. She killed the lamp and let the river take the room. Only the window kept her, a wine-red shape against the cold glass. On the nightstand, the clutch waited beside the dead phone cradle. 2 instruments, both patient, both tuned to the morning. She closed the office behind her without sound. 3 years of ledgers sealed shut in one small leather inch, in one small dried blood case. Down the marble hall she went, the clutch at her side, and nothing in the sleeping house yet knew what she was carrying toward the morning.
Be at the Riverside Gala. Bring the original ledger.
Ledger, 7 digits she had never written down, only ever rehearsed in the dark of her palm, a number kept like a knife in a drawer. The line rang twice, 3 times, longer. She held still and let it ring, the way one lets an old door take its time. Then the ringing broke and a man's old breath crossed the line, and there was a held second in which everything that came after was already decided.
Be at the Riverside Gala. Bring the original ledger.
Ledger. She held the line out across the silence between them and did not fill it. She had learned by now that the quiet was the only honest answer. She set the receiver down like someone setting the last tile of a floor. Done. Level. Not to be lifted again. She did not need his answer aloud. The hiss of an old man's held breath on the wire was already the yes. What she said took less than 10 seconds. What it undid would take the rest of her life. And she had already decided that was the price. She had spoken one line to one old man, and a quiet already beginning to move toward the marble lobby of the Riverside Gala. She knew the silence on the line, knew it from childhood, the kind a man keeps when he has recognized a voice he thought he would never hear again. In that silence, she measured her own knuckles against the wood, the way one braces a hand before lifting something heavier than iron. His quiet was the yes, and her nodding to it, to no one, through the silk, was the closing of a bargain neither had to name. At the slit's edge, her lid did not blink, only steadied, as if learning for the first time that a held quiet could answer as fully as a word. Down went the receiver into its cradle, soft enough that he on the other end might still believe she was only gathering breath, not gone. She had the notary's silence and the firm in a folio and the morning already at the glass, all 3 of them waiting for the same marble lobby. The line held its breath. On the other end, an old man's lungs remembered her, and the silence that answered was shaped like yes. No word crossed the wire. Only the quiet of a man who had waited decades to hear this particular daughter speak again. She did not repeat the request. She had learned 3 years ago that the right silence never needs explaining. The receiver settled, and with it 3 years of waiting settled too. Lightly, the way a ledger closes when the sum is already known. She crossed to the mirror the way one crosses to an old adversary. Polite, unhurried, already certain of the outcome. Her fingers rose to the knot beneath her chin, the knot she had tied at dawn for 1,000 dawns, and paused there. The silk lifted the way a held breath lifts, one careful inch, then another, and the light touched skin it had not touched in years. She held the fabric aloft a moment, comme on tient une preuve, then let it hang at her side, weightless and finished. Her own gaze met hers and did not flinch, the gaze of a stranger she had agreed finally to deploy. She catalogued the face the way she had catalogued the ledger, stroke by stroke, no tenderness, only the cold fact of ownership. Then, with the unhurried grace of a woman who has already won something no one in that lobby has named, she raised the veil again. Not yet, she said to the face in the glass, the one that would wait, patient as porcelain, for marble and chandelier light. The clutch that matched none of her silks, dried blood leather, slim, holding one folio, she pressed to her ribs like a second heart. She stood in the last of the river light, a veiled woman with an unveiled plan, and waited for the marble lobby to open its doors. The lobby was all chandelier and marble, and the small holy hum of strings, and down the stairs on his arm came the real daughter. She came down like imported goods, crystal on her throat, gold at her wrist, her smile already spent on no one in particular. Adrian offered his arm the way he offered signatures. Sanctioned, measured, already a matter of public record. Her gown ate the light, her shoulder turned toward the crystal, like a flower programmed to face the sun. Together they were a photograph the family had already printed, the heir and her accessory, centered, sanctioned, descending. At the foot of the stairs, he turned and offered his smile the way lesser men offer rings. Céline placed her fingers in his as if the marble under her heels were already a deed in her name. The lobby parted for them the way ballrooms part for sanctioned things, and without thinking, without being asked. He did not look at her. He looked at the room looking at her, which was, for Adrian, a kind of tenderness. Céline smiled at the chandelier as though it too had been left to her in a will. Emerald threw light into the crystal, and crystal threw it back. A small auction between the dress and the room, which the dress always won. She nodded to guests like a queen surveying inheritable land, and they nodded back, already adjusting the deeds in their heads. The crystal threw emerald splinters across the marble. Each nod she gave signed another small surrender from the room below. She answered each bowed head with a glance that cost her nothing. The room learning, gesture by gesture, who now owned its attention. Green fire ran up the crystal and down her back. She wore it the way a herald wears a coat of arms, without thinking. Even the orchids leaned as she passed, as if the room had already decided which pigment it would obey tonight. Every outstretched glass tilted instinctively toward the green. The room was calibrating itself to her spectrum without being asked. She let go of the rail the way one lets go of a banister in one's own house, as if marble owed her the floor. Her eyes moved over them the way an heir moves over land she has not yet signed for. Proprietorial, unhurried, already bored. She had only to descend. The room did the work, rearranging its light, its deference, its memory of who mattered. At the foot of the stairs, Adrian offered his hand the way one offers a deed. Flat, open, already signed. Their hands met like a contract being countersigned. Formal, public, already rehearsed in a dozen quieter rooms. His smile was a sanctioned thing, authorized at some earlier table, worn now for the room like a name badge. Only the tendon at his jaw gave him away. A small, involuntary pull beneath the sanctioned warmth. From below, he looked like a man already installed. His place at the head, confirmed by a hand that had not yet arrived. The offered hand never wavered. It had been positioned weeks ago, a prop set for this exact photograph. He angled the gesture for the room, not for her. The smile aimed at a dozen cameras that weren't there yet. Through the orchids, the gesture looked curated. Already a portrait hung on tomorrow's wall, still wet on the lobby's marble. Then the mother rose into the orchids behind them, beaming, the room watching three figures lock at last into a sanctioned shape. His eyes checked the orchids, confirmed his mother beaming, and returned. The smile finally permitted to loosen 1 degree. She came in the way the building intended its unprinted guests to come, through steel and concrete, head down behind the marble. Behind the silk, the only motion was the small, deliberate lift of each breath. Measured, rationed, kept under the weave. Where the corridor opened into the lobby, the silk read almost black. Only the spill let her go briefly wine-colored, then dark again. The usher walked her to the recessed section, as though following instructions written in another century. Behind the orchids, out of the photographs. Behind the orchids, she sat the way a draft sits in a chimney. Present, drafted, perfectly arranged not to be photographed. No one in the recessed section knew she had moved. The orchids had been placed precisely to absorb the small motions of hidden wives. Through the orchids, she found the head table, and her eyes marked it. The slit of silk closing again, as if she had never looked. Only the knot of her knuckles on the clutch confessed anything. The rest of her folded quietly into the building's intended shadow. May took the rote built for tray bearers and invisibility, silk swinging once in the cold draft of the marble. The orchids closed behind May like a box lid snapped on something deliberately forgotten beneath the ballroom's noise. Through the orchids, the head table became a tableau she knew by heart, the thumb on the bare spine. The same hand she hadn't felt in years, now performing its ownership for an entire ballroom of cameras. Her eye behind the slit dried, watching a rehearsed intimacy she had once mistaken for hers. The kiss on that shoulder was performed for the room, and the room never glanced behind the flowers. He dressed another woman in linen she had never received. Silk counted silently against her ribs. She learned to read his hand, the way a witness learns to read a signature. One stroke of his thumb told her everything the toast that followed was meant to confirm. The handprint on that back was the title deed of the whole evening, and she began to read it forward. The orchids became a window through which a wife watched her lease on her own life be renewed in someone else's name. His hand returned to its print like a stamp on a page she was about to overturn. The mother stood as if rehearsed from the first morning she had refused and called it a toast. The coupe climbed the air like a small bright guillotine, and the orchids held their breath for it. Her smile had been chosen like the centerpiece, arranged for the photograph, deaf to every name it left out. Her free hand opened toward Céline like a page, turning deliberately to the next chapter of the low estate. The glass rose through the chandelier like a vow, and the orchids watched it from beneath. From behind the flowers, the toast was a pageant whose entire script had been written without her. Her hand completed its arc towards Céline as if May were a clause she had edited out of the family grammar. A waiter's passage dragged the orchids aside one instant. long enough to see who the toast had not bothered to remember. She held her glass towards Céline like a named moon it had been agreed not to speak aloud. Even the mother's swallowing of her own toast was louder than any acknowledgement of the wife behind the orchids. The room clapped. The orchids did not. The wine-red silk did not. The veiled wife did not. The ballroom's tide of hands rose around her like water refusing to drown a single deliberate stone. She held stillness the way a held breath expects thunder, and the orchids held it with her. Inside the applause, May stood like a word the ballroom had agreed to applaud through rather than hear. The ballroom burst into applause, and May stayed absolutely still, her silk unmoved, the orchids frozen, a held breath carved out of the ovation. Only her silk did not move, while 1,000 palms filled the hall, stillness so complete it looked like stone deciding not to breathe. The ovation rolled past her like weather over a stone. She neither joined it nor flinched, the only quiet object in a room approving itself. She let the applause circle her and did not lift a finger. The orchids flanking her were the only other things in the room that refused to clap. Inside the ovation, she fixed her gaze past the orchids and did not stir. Stillness as a sentence the room would later be made to finish reading. The room applauded and she denied it her participation. Her silk, her hands, the orchids all conspiring in a single locked stillness inside the sound. Adrian rose and pressed Céline's hand flat to the table for the ballroom to see, a quiet act of possession staged as pride. He lifted his cold marble face to the room and spoke her into place, his hand claiming Céline's the whole time.
Céline is the future of this house.
Everyone. The words settled over the table like a deed being signed. Céline was the future, and his pressing hand acted as the witness. His pressed hand made her heir to the room before any document could. The gesture itself, the coronation he had rehearsed.
The future of this house is hers.
Framed high and centered, he held the verdict, his hand a seal on Céline's. The whole room taught who the house now belonged to. Céline lifted her chin and let the verdict dress her. The pressed hand was Adrian's promise and her cue to glow for the room. His verdict crossed the marble like a banner raised over the house, and somewhere behind the orchids, a wine-red silence kept refusing to applaud. His mouth shaped the vow as if it had always been true, as if the wine-red silence behind the orchids was not already counting his last warm moment. A whisper threaded through the orchids, someone asking after the wife, and May did not turn, letting the question find its own answer. The question and the wife curled through guests and was hushed by a glance. She let it die in the air without giving it her face. A breath of the question reached the orchids and was swallowed whole by her stillness. No nod, no flinch, no answer assigned to it. The question lifted out of the recessed dark and fell back unfinished. She gave it nothing, not a glance, not a tremor of the veil. A glance silenced the questioner before the words fully landed, and behind the orchids, the veiled wife stayed written out of the room's courage. Whispers rode through the guests and broke against the orchids. The veiled profile offered nothing back but its own held deliberate silence. The question was asked, then quietly murdered by the room's manners, leaving only the orchids and her unspeaking silk to remember it had existed. She let the question glance off the orchids and pass. Her one slow blink was the only life the recessed section of the room was permitted to see. Above the whispering rose, she stayed motionless at the center, the question skirting her like guests forced to walk around a closed door. The question died in the hush, and then her silk moved for the first time, a single fold as if stillness had finally decided to become a plan. A service door breathed open. An elderly gray notary clutching a leather binder shuffles in, his eyes scanning the recessed orchids. They find her. Behind the orchids, she feels his search before she sees it. A tired old man who came because she called the right number at the right hour. He came. The ledger's spine is in his hands, and across a room of red dresses and orchids, only her 3 years of silence could have sent for him. He is smaller than she remembered, older, held together by duty, but the binder is the right binder, and that is all the room requires tonight. The crowd does not see him, a gray suit in a gray suit's world, but she has studied that walk in a back office for 3 quiet years. Their eyes meet the way old ledgers meet. A column found, a figure confirmed. He does not wave, she does not wave. No grand entrance, no announcement, only an old man and the woman who learned silence from a family that mistook it for consent. She did not summon him to the gala for warmth. She summoned him because he is the only man in this city who kept the original ink of her father's hand. He has carried that binder through 3 winters without being asked, and now the asking lives in a single look across chandelier light. 2 strangers in a room of gold, one in gray, one in wine-red silk, exchanging the only honest glance the gala will produce tonight. She gives him the smallest nod her silk will allow, 1 degree of chin, 3 years of preparation, and he understands the whole of it. He has been told what shape to wear, deferential, forgettable, a servant with a tray no one will question, and he wears it like a second coat. By the steps, he becomes furniture. The kind of old help a room of chandeliers trains itself never to see, which is exactly what she needs. He is in place. The binder is in place. Nothing in the recessed section has noticed, and that is the last mercy the silence will buy her. He has waited in offices like this before, beside men who did not yet know they had lost, and he waits again with the original ledger and the quiet of a man insurance cannot buy. Her hand finds the clutch against her ribs, the dried blood leather holding the photocopied years, and she allows herself just this once to feel ready. He does not look back at her. The nod already told him everything: where to stand, how long to wait, and that the evening will give him exactly one signal. Position confirmed. She closes her eye behind the silk for one honest second, the last time she will hide a thing from this room. Two people waiting the same wait in the same hall with the same 3 years folded between them, and neither of them yet breathing the room's air. The stillness that was patience is no longer patience. It is the loaded second before a struck match, and she is the one holding the flame. She rises the way ink rises on a page, deliberate, dark, and inevitable, and the recessed row does not lift a single head to notice her. No usher stops her, no neighbor turns. She is still only a veiled wife, and a veiled wife is exactly the furniture the room has agreed not to see. 3 years of practiced invisibility pay their last dividend. A whole recessed row blind to the woman standing among them, about to walk into history. The orchids seem to part for her the way silence parts for truth, and still the recessed row sits facing the stage, not one head turned toward her. She is standing, she is stepping, she is moving, and the recessed section remains seated as though a chair, not a woman, has just been emptied into the dark. The room will kneel in 90 seconds, but for now it is just an orchid wall, an aisle, and a wine-red silhouette that the seated guests have still not learned to see. She presses one hand to the chair and rises. The seated guests behind her keep their eyes on the toast. The veil sways once as she reaches her full height. No one in the recessed shadow turns to watch her. She stands behind the orchids, clutch pressed to her ribs, a standing ghost in a seated room. One step forward and the orchid wall releases her. Still unseen, already moving toward the aisle. She takes the side aisle and the wine-red silk begins to swing with each slow, deliberate step. The clutch sits low at her side. Guests half turn, not summoned, just unsettled by the moving silk. A corridor opens. Not because anyone commands it, but because the silk makes the seated uneasy. Her veil breathes with each step. The marble floor throws back the small red reflection of it. Stage light reaches for her at the end of the aisle. She walks straight into its edge without hurrying. Programs lower in her wake. The rustle she leaves behind is the only sound the room allows itself. Chandelier blur floats behind her veil as she advances. A wine thread pulling through the room. The aisle shortens. Ahead, the stage steps rise pale, and a charcoal figure at their foot notices her. Her hand tightens on the dried blood clutch, not from nerves, but because the last few steps must be silent. She stops one stride short of him, and the silk settles final against her shoulders like a verdict. Adrian sees the silk coming, and his jaw does the thing she has read for 1,000 days. The muscle along his jaw pulls once, that small, cold tell she was taught to overlook. He turns from her face to the stage steps, already calculating who she is allowed to be tonight. He steps forward into the aisle's end, filling the gap between her and the lit stage behind him. Charcoal shoulders rise across the steps. Behind the veil, in soft focus, her eyes do not lower. One hand finds the banister at his hip, the posture of a man using architecture as a command. His narrow gaze drops to the veil's edge, then lifts to the slit where her eyes wait, unhurried. She is framed low, and he is framed high, yet she does not stop moving until she is one step below. He does not speak yet. He lets the cold marble of his expression do the warning for him. He plants himself across the steps like a door slammed shut, the last authority he thinks he still holds.
May, you were told to sit. This is not your moment. May, you were told to sit. This is not your moment.
Moment. He steps between her and the light, a wall of charcoal silk where the staircase used to be, her path closed by a hand.
May, you were told to sit. This is not your moment.
Below him, she is all silk and silence, a veiled shape refusing the order to become small again. His hand hovers like a gate drawn across the stairs, and the veiled wife beneath it simply does not turn around.
May, you were told to sit. This is not your moment.
He tells her this is not her moment, but the veiled figure on the stair has already stopped believing in his moments. Something in the silence beneath his command should have told him she is not here to obey him tonight. She is still wearing the veil, but for the first time it is no longer hiding anything from him. She halts one step below him, close enough that the silk between them remembers her shape and trembles once, then nothing. One stare down, one breath in, the silk between husband and wife reads the distance like a held string about to sing or snap. A draft from the lobby lifts the silk once between them, a held thread that he reads as obedience, and she knows is everything else. Down the length of her, the silk goes quiet, a held string that has decided finally which way it will be pulled. From above, he scans the silk for the bow of her head and finds, for the first time in 1,000 days, that it is not coming. Between his step and hers, the silk says the only thing either of them will say aloud tonight, and it trembles, and it stops. The marble gives them back to themselves, parented in cold glass. Husband above, wife below, a length of silk rhythmically refusing to lie flat. Her hand is halfway to the knot beneath her chin before she has decided, the body already a sentence ahead of the mind. The whole lobby hears the silk tremble and stop, a string pulled taut between two bodies, neither of which will yield the stare. The hand finds the knot she tied at dawn 1,000 times. The same knot tonight that she is about to teach her fingers to undo. Her fingers undo the knot the way they tied it. Slow, tenderless, exact. The one act she has repeated 1,000 dawns, now reversed. Above her on the step, Adrian's hand rises late to stop the fingers, and learns between one heartbeat and the next that he cannot. The second loop falls the way the first sigh of dawn does, light arriving on a face that has not been seen in 3 years. She lifts the silk away from her face like drawing a curtain off a sealed window, and the room finally sees the wall behind it. The silk, untethered, doesn't fly. It falls. The color that was almost the whole of her drops 1,000 days at her feet. Under the chandelier, finally uncovered, she is only a face. Oval, pale, defiant, and the room has to decide what to do with a face it was told didn't exist. Adrian's contempt cracks for one frame into something closer to recognition. Then the wall slides back into place, faster than before. She holds the lower stair like the high ground she's already won, and the falling silk between them is now just a color on the cold marble floor. She reaches up slowly and unties the knot, the same knot she tied at dawn for 1,000 days. 1,000 mornings knot, loosened in one unbroken gesture of her still hand. She lifts the veil. Chandelier light strikes her bare skin for the first time, and the room goes silent. The silk lifts, and the cold marble air touches a face the world has not seen in 3 years. Behind the orchids, the gasps die. There is only her face and the river quiet of the room. The veil drops. For the first time, she stands in the room as a face, not a color. 1,000 days of silk, now just cloth, penduluming against her loosened wrist. She has owned the low frame for 3 years. Now the high angle is hers. The hall folds inward. Every face caught in the act of seeing her, finally, too late. The first uncovered breath she takes in 1,000 days. Silk red, river cold, finally hers. She turns toward the head table, and for the first time, they are the ones who cannot look away. She lets the silk fall to the marble, not discarded, set down like a debt paid. Pale, oval, high cheekboned, her eyes, defiant, hold Adrian's across the silent room. One wet lash, one steady iris. 3 years of silence aimed like a blade. She does not blink, and now the 1,000-day gaze she practiced in silk arrives bare. Cheekbone like cold porcelain, and the defiance in her eye no longer asking anything. Her eyes on Adrian, orchids between them, silence between them, 3 years between them. A strand of black hair falls across her bare cheek. She lets it fall like every veil before it. She stands, pale, high-boned, jet-haired, holding him with eyes he never let her raise. She turns the lit cheek toward the room, and the defiance that silk had hidden becomes the room's only light. Chin lifted, the bare throat she hid for 3 years now sharp as a blade against the chandelier. Face open, hands open, she waits one held second before she lets the silence break her. For one frame his contempt cracks, recognition almost, then it hardens again like cooling marble. His grip finds the marble rail, the first time he has needed something to hold in 3 years. His mask reassembles, contempt plays back over the crack like fresh plaster on old marble. He straightens his cuffs as if the gesture will return the high angle to him. It does not. For one frame, the contempt cracks. Something old moves behind his eyes, almost recognition. Then the marble sets again. He repairs the fracture in a heartbeat, the jaw hardening, the eyes going glassy and narrow again. Through the veil, he looks almost for an instant like a man remembering a promise. Then the memory is bricked over. One blink reboots him. The marble reforms, the detachment clicking back into place like a door latched. He steadies himself the way a man steadies a table that has already been knocked. Too late in front of everyone. Now the high angle belongs to her, and Adrian Lowe is pushed to the bottom of the frame where the kneeling will find
Adrian Lowe. The firm you stand on was signed to me by my father. Adrian Lowe. The firm you stand on was signed to me by my father. Adrian Lowe. The firm you stand on was signed to me by my father. Adrian Lowe. The firm you stand on was signed to me by my father. Adrian Lowe. The firm you stand on was signed to me by my father. Adrian Lowe. The firm you stand on was signed to me by my father. The firm you stand on was signed to me by my father. Adrian Lowe. The firm you stand on was signed to me by my father. Adrian Lowe. The firm you stand on was signed to me by my father. Adrian Lowe. The firm you stand on was signed to me by my father.
She lifts the photocopied page into the chandelier light, and the forged signature glows through it like a wound. Even the back row can read it. The tilt of my father's name mirrored wrong onto Adrian's. She turns it into the light the way a witness turns an evidence tag. Slow, deliberate, undeniable. She holds it between them, the evidence and the man who forged it, and lets the chandelier finish the sentence. Her eyes over the lit edge of the page find the back row, where the truth sits in 1,000 gilded chairs. The room reads the forged stroke from every seat. The paper has become the largest thing in the chandelier light. There it is, my father's name, tilted onto Adrian's by a hand that thought silk would hide it forever. She holds it out toward them like a hostess, finally offering the guests the one thing they came for. Even Céline feels the cold from the paper. Her fingers climb to her emerald as if checking that it too is still hers. She lowers the page the way she once lowered the veil. Slowly, deliberately on her own clock now. She gives the smallest nod, barely a breath, and the gray notary reads it like a verdict already spoken. The elderly notary steps past her onto the stage, laying the original ledger open to the page that proves it. She keeps her eye on the notary's hands, watching proof settle onto marble the way she once settled the silk. The ledger lies open on the stage. Her father's name, her father's stroke, set in front of every glass and every eye. She does not flinch as the room finds her face, one stunned guest at a time, orchids trembling, silk bare. Her fingers lift from the page, letting the proof lie still under the light. She does not need to hold it anymore. Behind her, Adrian's spine locks. He heard the ledger's spine settle the way one hears a cell close. The notary braces the open page and lifts the stamps. The proof now has a hand and a brass edge. She lifts her chin the smallest degree, and the step she stands on becomes hers before the stamp falls. She lifts her gaze to the silent room, and the words come out calm, low, into the microphone he never gave her.
For 3 years I kept your books, and you kept my face under silk.
I wore that veil because I thought obedience was the door to being chosen. It was a door that never opened. Obedience, I learned, is not the door. It is the curtain they hang in front of the door. Across the marble, Adrian's jaw loads at the word obedience, then seals. She has named the lock he built out loud. The last word lands, and the room keeps its breath. Wine glasses stilled. Not one glass lifted to interrupt her. It did not. The 3 words hang in the chandelier light, and she lets them hang there until they are heard twice. Adrian's hand lowers the inch he was too late to claim. His dominance now seeps out the bottom of the frame. She closes her mouth over the last word with one chosen blink. The silk at her throat still as a held pendulum. She stands high-centered behind the ledger, and for these held seconds, the marble around her is hers, not his. Her gaze crosses the silent room and lands, without turning, back on the green and gold figure at the head table. Across the head table, Céline's bright smile stalls mid-curve, and her hand drifts up to the emerald as if checking it is still hers. Her fingertips press the emerald once, as if the cold stone could still certify the warm seat she was promised. Her lips part with no sound. The wide, bright eyes flick to the stage and back, finding nothing there to rescue her. Through the gold rim of her glass, the wine-red column on the stage refracts into a doubled red. Proof looks like her, and not like Céline. The mocking lilt dies in her throat. The curl on her cheek slips another inch, and the emerald sits cold under a thumb that presses too hard. She sinks a half-inch lower in her gilded chair, emerald pooling wider, and the hand that touched the necklace comes to rest palm up, empty. Her fingers find the emerald at her throat, pressing it as though it might dissolve. The smile freezes, the room loud in her ears. She grips the emerald until the knuckles go white. The smile drains from her face like color from a bruise. Slowly, she flattens the emerald against her chest, a reflex as if confirming it hasn't vanished. The confidence she carried in is gone. Her hand closes around the stones once, then releases. Empty fingers settle on emerald satin. The necklace is still there. She isn't sure she is. The mother turns, reaching for Céline's portrait, the one she dusted every morning. There is only a wall of orchids. Nothing answers. Her eyes sweep the bare marble, searching for the frame she kept polished. Orchids sway in the ventilation. The portrait exists only in her memory now. She half steps forward, hand outstretched, as if the image might bloom from marble. It doesn't. The wall gives her nothing. Only orchids and silence. She touches the orchid where the portrait's edge should meet her fingertips. The petal bends, springs back. No frame, no guilt, only flowers. Her mouth opens, searches for a word. She turns to Adrian. His back is half turned, his eyes on May. He does not see her reaching. She reaches for a chair back, steadying the room that has tilted beneath her. The gala's murmur swells around her silence like water closing over a stone. She stares at the orchids, bloom by bloom, willing them to become a portrait. They do not. They are only flowers, and she is only standing among them. She turns a slow quarter circle, searching hotel walls for a portrait that hung only in her penthouse. The marble here offers nothing but itself. Her hand falls from the orchid frond. Nothing answered. She stands between white blooms and blank wall. Her devotion suddenly architectural and empty. She stands between the orchids and the bare wall, forgotten. The room has turned its back. The story now belongs to a different woman entirely.
You kept the pearls, May. I kept the firm. Keep the pearls. You kept the pearls, May. I kept the firm. Keep the pearls. You kept the pearls, May. I kept the firm. Keep the pearls. You kept the pearls, May. I kept the firm. Keep the pearls. You kept the pearls, May. I kept the firm. Keep the pearls. You kept the pearls, May. I kept the firm. Keep the pearls.
The words hang in chandelier light. Céline's fingers go still on the emerald, a fly trapped in amber. The joke already someone else's. May turns away as one shuts a finished account. No backward glance. The silk swings once, settles. The matter between them is closed. Guests exchange glances. A champagne flute tilts forgotten in someone's hand. The whisper is no longer about Céline. It has found a new center. Céline's emerald dress spreads across the marble step like something spilled and irretrievable. She does not gather it up. She does not rise. For once, Céline says nothing. A chestnut curl loosens from its set and drops against her cheek. She does not brush it back. The curl sticks to the faint shine at her temple. She lets it cling. Every language she performed in has gone quiet at once. Céline's bright tongue has finally abandoned her. A single curl slips to her cheek, and no wit pardons it. The glossy coil against her cheek is the loudest thing she offers now. Her old smile cannot reach across the quiet. For the first time, Céline gathers no words. Her gloss curls against her cheek like a flag lowering. Every rehearsed laugh has died at her teeth. The curl along her jaw is the rejoinder she can't deliver. She searches the room for the script that always saved her. The curl answers instead, slow and final. Her bangle ticks marble like a small confession. The curl stays against her cheek where no one will brush it aside. Her hands lie open and find nothing in them. A curl settles against her cheek like a period at the end of her. No retort, no gloss, no pearl of laughter, only the curl, given to gravity at last against her cheek. His hand reaches for her and finds the air 2 fingers short. She is stone, and his fingers lower alone. 2 fingers of silk remain uncrossed. His wrist gives, and the reaching hand descends without ever arriving. She meets the silence with her bare face. His hovering hand slows, dies, and returns to him heavier. His fingers close on nothing. Small surrendering fist, and lower an inch, a yard, then to his side. She does not move, and the not moving is the verdict. His hand falls back, ownership already gone from it. The 2-finger air is the one territory he can no longer take. His hand retreats past his own thigh. He studies the hand as if reading the moment it stopped being his. It descends, dismissed from her sleeve. She turns toward him only after he has ungripped the air. Small courtesy, large consummation. His arm is already a foreign limb. Her straightened spine writes the rest. He will not reach again. His lowered hand is rehearsing its next removal she will not permit. She sets her shoulders to speak.
I am without a name. I am uncovered. The holding company reverts to me at midnight. It is recorded by this notary. I am myself, Ply, uncovered and named. The firm reverts to me at midnight. I am uncovered, and the firm is mine. Recorded by this notary here tonight. The firm is mine. I am the owner of this company. I am uncovered. The holding company reverts to me at midnight. Recorded by this notary.
Her name and her face returned to the same sentence. The chandelier held its breath above her bare, unflinching skin. The stamp fell once, a small iron mouth biting paper, and the whole marble room flinched at the sound of it. One small mechanical crack, and the air turned to marble. Every breath in the room suspended above the drying ink. The ink dried faster than a room full of inherited money could decide whether to breathe. She did not blink at the crack of it. She had been listening for that sound for 1,000 mornings. The gavel was a stamp the size of a thumb, and it split the inheritance of a house down its marble seam. The ledger closed like a door on 3 years of silk, and the small gray man became its quiet, unshakable guard. She did not turn to confirm what was already sealed. The paper spoke. She had only to let it. Even the stamp's small servant bowed to the page he had just made law, deference flowing upward to the deed, not the man. Then the silence begat silence, weight inviting weight, as a room learned the shape of its new floor. She watched them learn the arithmetic. Name plus deed equals owner. The sum she had carried in silence for 3 years. The eldest went first, as eldest do, his white head tipping forward like a candle answering a flame that had outlived him. Then the next and the next. Deference moving through the room like a low tide finding its own level. Marble taught them the choreography. One knee, one nod, one lowered lid. A language older than any signature. Then came knees. Old men folding toward a floor they had owned since birth, now renting it from her. She watched ownership settle over them like weather, the old world bending its stiff back to a name written in ink that morning. Even the women who had ignored her veil learned the angle of their necks, old courtesy returning like muscle memory, some bent from habit, some from fear. Both looked identical under chandelier light, and both kept their eyes off her face. The room re-ranked itself the way marble reorders light, every angle now bending toward the wine-red figure at its apex. They had bowed to a surname for 50 years. Tonight, the surname belonged to a woman they had photographed around, and the marble did not argue. When the last head dropped, the silence completed itself. A held note only power can hold, and only power can release. Then Céline went down, not in deference, but in collapse. The emerald folding around her like a flag refused by its wind. The emerald that had hummed all evening went quiet on stone. Jewelry learning, for once, how to lie still. She reached up once, the way a child reaches in a nightmare, and the mother's sleeve passed through her fingers like silk through water. The mother's hand arrived where the daughter used to stand and closed on chandelier light and a marble step that did not love her back. And Céline, who had inherited the room, felt it tilt beneath her, the emerald pooling on the cold step like spilled wine no one had poured. Her knees met marble before her pride could stop them. The satin folded into itself, and the necklace clinked once against the stone. The mother's hand swept the air where a daughter had been and found only the vibration of chandeliers and the faint ghost of chestnut perfume. Céline's glossy curl loosened against her cheek, unfixed for the first time, as if the architecture of her had been built for applause alone. No one caught her because no one had been taught to. The pearls had taught the room to admire, not to hold. She sat on the step of a stage she had believed was hers, and the marble was colder than any stone she had ever collected. Adrian remained standing, the only man upright in a room that had learned, in a single breath, which way to bow. May turned her uncovered gaze to him across the orchids, and waited the way one waits for a tide that has already turned. The orchids between them held their white heads perfectly still, as if even the flowers understood which name the marble now answered to. He did not speak. He had run out of sentences that worked on her, and the silence had become her territory, not his. Her jet hair fell straight and unhidden under the chandelier light, and the defiance in her eyes was no longer patience pretending. His jaw tightened. That old signal she had learned to decode like weather, but this time it signaled only that he had lost the room. She did not move toward him. She did not need to. The stillness itself was the sentence she had never been allowed to pronounce. The guests held their breath the way one holds a door open for someone who has finally learned to walk through it alone. Between the white orchids and the kneeling room, only Adrian and May stood in opposition, and only one of them was standing by choice. She waited one beat longer, letting the silence do what 3 years of obedience never could, make him small without her lifting a hand. Then his knees broke, not all at once, but in the slow unhinging of a man whose marble had been pulled out from under him. One hand found the banister, knuckles whitening, as he lowered himself onto the floor he had believed was purchased in his own name. He knelt before the veil she was no longer wearing, before the absence of it, which weighed more than the silk ever had. And May turned from him, not in triumph, but the way one closes a book whose final page one has already read. She walked uncovered toward the river door, the chandelier light sliding off her shoulders like something the house could no longer afford to keep. The marble caught the sound of her steps and returned them clean, as if the floor had changed allegiance with everyone else. Adrian's kneeling silhouette held the stage behind her, a man become monument to the moment he had chosen the wrong sister to crown. She did not look back. The river door waited, and beyond it, the city that had always been hers, written now in her own hand. The veil stayed on the marble where she had set it, a small pool of wine-red silk, the only thing the Lowe family had left to inherit.